Hello, everybody. We are going to kind of take a break from the kind of classic design and development and just talk a little bit, get a little bit more into the weeds of doing specific things in development. So today we're going to take a look at randomizing. Most of the time when you randomize, you generally do it with a list or an array. And the way I tend to teach this or explain this is going into Excel and thinking about each column here. So the A, B, C, D column as an array. So we could have like an entire column that represents a possible array. It could be a size 200, could be a size of 700, 10,000, 4. But just imagine this being all here. If you look at these numbers here, you can also think of it in terms of a list. It's a list that can grow, right, as we go. So anything that isn't populated by a number is essentially not part of the list until we add to it. And then if we subtract out of it, it goes back out of the list. So anyways, let's go back to this and just say that this is a C array. It starts at 1. Okay, that's not usually the case. Unfortunately, most programming languages, they'll start you off at 0. But plenty of scripting languages and programming languages do start at 1. So it's not the worst thing in the world. And really all that we're doing is we're going to randomize these numbers, right? And they look random already. And that's because I did these by hand. But let's say this is a predictable order, even though the numbers look relatively random. So in other words, 6 is going to always be followed by 4, which is going to be followed by 8, which is going to be followed by 2 every time we run through this list. So how do we conceptually change this into a randomized set of numbers? And in fact, if you would like to do this, we could do something to the effect of, well, I could hit delete, I can hit 1, and then we have the number matches essentially the subscript of the array. Either way is fine. But if you're going to play along with this, I'd suggest just populating this with some type of number. Once you do that, now all of a sudden we can start mixing it around. And the best way to mix them around is to start from the beginning, right? And take this 1 and move it to maybe the 10th spot. But how do we do that? Well, that's where random numbers come into play. So you have a list, let's just call it a list at this point, of 11 numbers. So you can run a list from either 0 to 10 or 1 to 11, whichever way you want to think about it, and then assign each one of these pieces to that number. Start at 1 and then go to 11. Now, what we can do is randomize those numbers. So in other words, if I can pick a number 1 through 11 each time. And how many times am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to do that through the entire set. So in other words, I'm going to randomize 11 numbers 11 times, taking their turn. So if you think about this, this works great with a loop. We can do a loop now we'll start at 1, and we'll swap this number 1, with a random number from 1 to 11. Now, it could end up that we just swap it with itself. So 1 could end up back in 1. That's okay, because whenever you're talking about random numbers, each mixture of numbers has to have the same set, or have to have the same chance of being selected. So in other words, 1 through 11 has to be one possibility of our outcome. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, just the order you see them in. That has to be a possibility, and it should be just as equal to 11, 7, 6, 5, 3, 7. You know what I mean? So all these other numbers that could possibly be mashed around. So if we take 1 out, it rolls a 1, essentially. I always like thinking of it as a dice roll. And it puts it back 1, that's fine. If that's the case, then we go to 2. And let's say 2 rolls of 7. So it's going to want to put it in slot 7. But how do you do it? Because if I copy, or actually, if I copy and then paste, now I've deleted the 7. So the best way you can do it is just create, or I shouldn't say the best way, but one way to do it is to put it in a temporary variable. So I could say that's 2. And now I can copy the 7 and put it into the 2 slot. And then copy. And you can move, a cut is probably just as good. And put it into the 2. And now we got a nice swap. In programming, you can't really cut. So in other words, once you establish the temp2 variable, unless you clear it out, it's not going to go anywhere. So it's more of a copy and paste. But that's okay, because in the next round, what we're going to do is we say, oh, in the 3, I rolled a 9. So now I have to take the 3 and copy it and put it over here, and it's just going to erase it, because since this is an array and can hold multiple values, this is really just a simple variable that's holding only one value. And you're going to do the same thing. And as you can see, it's already looking kind of random here. But right now we've always gone forward, but we can also go backwards. So I can do this. Let's say when I get to the 4th spot, it wants to slip with 1. Well, same exact process. And we're moving things backwards instead of forwards, which is good, because you wouldn't want the low numbers always to have a higher chance of being in the first slots than the later on. And then lastly, what you're going to want to do is go through each one of these at least once. It sounds at first like, oh, the 11th slot, it's not fair to the 11th slot because it doesn't get a chance to be changed. Well, it does, because remember, when 1 rolls, I can roll 11 and it can go in there. 2 rolls and I can roll 11 and flop with that. So by the time you get to the 11th one, yeah, each one of these, in this case, we'll call it index or subscripts, has had a chance to swap. If you leave one of them out, like let's say you go 1 to 10, that doesn't guarantee that 11 will ever get swapped. So you want to make sure you go through the entire list. And then all of a sudden you have a random letter. And it already, to be honest, it already looks fairly random. The only thing that doesn't look random here is there, and that's because we've only worked up to 4. If we kept working down to 11, that would solve the issue. All right. Hopefully you can use this in your programming languages. Again, this would be C1, so that would be C, square brackets 1. In like C# or C++, that'd be C square bracket 0. You'd have to subtract 1 from each one of these numbers to get that index. All right, happy computing.